Okay, here's another video on graph sinusoidal functions phase shift. There's two ways this question can go. One is they give you the equation and they ask you to graph it. Here they're giving you this graph and they're labeling these 2 points and they're asking you to write this equation. So here's how I went about this solving this question. What I like to do is draw my box. And then identify the transformations and then enter them into the equation and then simplify the equation. Also, I should have asked, added the last thing on this would be to check on Desmos, my graph. So what's the box? All I like to do is I like to take the box of a basic period of the function, okay? And so going back to the graph that they gave us, what I'm really looking at right here is since we have to write this as a sine function, this could be written as a cosine function if you wanted it to. You know, all sine and cosine functions are really the same. They're just shifted over versions of each other. But they're having us write as a sine function. So I kind of start it where the sine starts. You know, it starts in the middle at its midline and goes up and then goes down. And you don't quite get the full period over here, but we can figure out what it is. Okay. So really, I'm looking at kind of this. I think I can draw on this. Hold on. I'm looking at this box kind of right here, and I'm ignoring everything else. I just want a basic one period of the function. Okay, so here's my drawing. The amplitude, the midline is at -3. If we go back to the graph, you can see the midline of the graph here is at -3. It goes up to 2 and down to -8. So I've got that on my box here, going from 2 to -8. And then the period, I start at 0.5. That's the easy part, right? The x is 0.5 here at the starting point. And we don't really have this labeled right here. But if you think about this, this is from the trough to the midline, and that's 1/4 of the sine function. So I know the difference between these 2 points in terms of x, right? I'd have to go over 2 to get to this point right here. So that means 2 is really going to be a 1/4 of the period. So to figure out what the x is right here, I just go over 2 from 0.5, which is 2.5. And you can see that looks about right on the picture. So I go from 0.5 to 2.5, from 2.5 to 4.5, from 4.5 to 6.5, and then from 6.5 to 8.5. Okay, and then I've drawn my basic sine box where I've got the peak, the trough, and the midline labeled on the left side, and then I've got my x values on the bottom for the different parts of the period. And now I just have to identify my transformations. So the vertical stretch here is how much, what's the amplitude of the wave from the midline to either to the peak or to the trough. And I can see from -3 to 2, that's a difference of 5, right? So it has to go up 5 to get to the peak. Same thing to get down from -3 to -8. It's a distance of 5. So my vertical stretch is 5. My vertical shift, right? Remember the basic sine function has a midline right at 0, right? But this has a midline at -3, so my vertical shift is down to -3. Okay. Now let's do the horizontal transformations. So the horizontal stretch, this is usually the one that trips people up the most. Okay. And so all you have to do is figure out what the period of the function is here. How long does it take it to go through one cycle? And that's just really 8.5 minus 0.5, or 8. And then I just have to take that number and divide 2 pi by it. So I get pi over 4 when I reduce that fraction. Okay. So pi over 4 is going to be the number in the equation. Okay. And then the horizontal shift, usually sine starts at an x of 0, right? But here it's been shifted to the right by 0.5. And so I make the horizontal shift -0.5. And that negative is sometimes kind of tricky because you think if it's negative, it should move it back 0.5. But on the horizontal shifts, it kind of works the opposite of what you think should happen. So a negative horizontal shift moves it to the right in the positive direction. Okay. Now that you've got all the different transformations, we want it to enter it into the equation. And this is really the form of the equation, not that you're going to answer in, but that's that you should enter all the transformations in. It could be written a little clearer. I'm sorry about that, but it's a times sine, right? This is the vertical stretch. And then inside the parentheses, you've got b, which is the horizontal stretch or compression. And then inside another pair of parentheses, you've got x and then plus or minus the horizontal shift. And then the whole thing on the outside, I think I'm missing a pair of parentheses there. There should be a second parentheses here, but plus or minus d, and that gives you the vertical shift up or down. Okay, so I'm just going to enter these numbers in. 5 goes here because that's the vertical stretch. -3, the vertical shift should go to the end of the equation. The horizontal stretch is pi over 4, so that goes inside the parentheses, but outside the one with the x and the horizontal shift. And then the horizontal shift goes inside here. Okay, now so that's the easiest way to take the transformations and plug them into the equation. But of course, they want us to simplify for our answer. So they have us answer as, they just have us distribute this pi over 4 to these two things. So this is pi over 4 times x, or pi over 4x, and then pi over 4 times 1/2, right, 0.5, is really pi over 8. Okay, you just enter that in, and everything should be good. Now, one thing I would say is that it's always great to just graph this equation on Desmos. All right, let me do that real quick. So y is equal to, I think it was 5 times sine, yes, sine, and then what was it, pi over 2, or pi over 4? Pi over 4. X minus pi over 8. Okay, close the parentheses. Whoops, close the parentheses. And then I'm thinking -3. Let me make sure. Yeah. So on Desmos, I've got my sine function, and all I want to do real quick is check to make sure it has the same 2 points that this one does. Right? Does it go through 0.5 and -3? Oh, it should be it. Yeah. Yeah, that's pretty close, right? Yeah, there it is. 0.5 and -3. And to go through the other one, which is -1.5 and -8. This will be a little easier to find because it's just this trough here. -1.5 and -8. So then we can feel confident, hitting the submit button on Khan Academy, knowing we're going to get it right. So I hope that helps a little bit on this skill. It's a tough one.